welcome to another Bonsai Wire podcast. Michael Hagedorn and I are sitting down and talking about growing today. We've been talking about this idea for, it's probably been close to a year, and we're finally getting together in the same space and going to have some conversations about what it looks like to grow, what growing looks like in America, and probably a couple of other topics on the way.
Yeah, excellent. You do a lot of growing.
Yeah, I do a lot of growing. That's kind of how I spend my day.
You have a big backyard. In fact, it's probably not exactly a backyard, is it?
No, not quite. Yeah.
How many acres are you cultivating?
We're on 1.5 acres, and I have about half of that in cultivation.
Right.
Most of them right now are still in pots, but I do have about 1 acre set aside for ground growing.
Right.
But I'm not quite there. I dug some stuff about a year ago and wasn't quite happy with the root spread that I was getting, so I decided to put pause on that and do a little more root work before I get into the ground, because the ground really can accelerate good and bad stuff. So
yeah,
I really wanted to make sure things are ready to go.
What's the percentage of things you have in the ground versus what you have in pots?
Right now 1%, not even 1% in the ground.
Very little. Oh, okay.
Yeah, but eventually it'll be about 10.
So not that much. So you really have a preference for pot grown?
Yeah, I think the speed that I saw happening with the ground, it's an accelerator pedal, so if a wheel is falling off of the vehicle, it's not going to improve by putting it in. A famous saying that I often follow up with my mom about is when we were kids, she often said, putting the leftovers in the freezer to eat another time does not improve the leftovers. So it's a similar idea. It's like, if the vehicle, you got to get the vehicle in good tune before you press on the accelerator, or you push forward all the problems too.
So staying in a container for a few years helps that. Yeah,
especially those first couple of years to really get the root spread worked out, get some initial trunk line worked out, and then you can put it in the ground. And then I'm not sure exactly what other growers do, but I really see the value of pulling it out of the ground every couple of years to just tease out roots and really to make sure that things were set up before just letting it rip for 10 years.
Yeah. I have a friend who's doing that. Starts a plant for 2 to 3 years as a young thing, and does some early movements in the trunk when it's still super supple and you can do almost anything with it. Then he puts it in the ground for usually no more than 3 years, he tells me, and then he takes it out again. And sometimes he does this process 3 or 4 times before it's ready for a bonsai pot. But by that time, you have this sort of, maybe what we'll be talking about, there's sort of this magic combination of both control and speed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that having it in the ground, it's hard to get on your hands and knees and see, is the Nabari doing this thing? Is the wire cutting in if I'm wiring it in the ground? Any of that, like having it above ground every couple of years to just sit on the bench and get, really get it up at eye level and get an idea of like what branch does need to be cut off instead of just making some big pruning decisions on the ground. Really, can really help to set that up a lot better than just letting it rip in the ground.
Yeah. So one of the things that we were talking about is an idea that you have that your hobbyist grower has an advantage or two.
Yeah, I've heard this from a couple of different people. I suppose it was a year ago when Daisaku Namoto was visiting Portland. Yeah. He was visiting my yard, and he said this is the case in Japan. I've talked to Jonas Dubois. He's mentioned that this is something that he's seen over the years, where the idea is that the professional grower or the commercial grower has to put out volume, and so we have to make decisions based on what my time is worth, what my time can handle. I have volume, and I have to always be controlling that to make sure I'm putting out quality product, but volume is kind of the name of my game, whereas someone that's a more serious hobbyist can take the time on each individual plant, so they're doing series of 25 or they're doing series of 100 versus a series of 1,000. And so, they're selling off cheaper quality stuff or lower quality stuff to the club or to selling it off for a workshop cheaply, and they don't necessarily have to think economically. They're thinking quality from the beginning.
Right.
And so, after we talked about that, sitting around coffee one day, I thought, that's an interesting idea. I've sort of seen it playing out, but I'd really kind of like to explore the nuance of that, what that really looks like.
Yeah, yeah. So Daisaku Nomoto, you mentioned, is one of the gifts that we have to our bonsai understanding. He's one of the teachers at the Shohin School that Jonas and Andrew have here on the West Coast, and he blows through town every now and then. I met him years ago at Boone's yard. He is one of Boone's senpais. So he comes from Japan. He's a young man. He's very unassuming, but has this wealth of knowledge and is so relatable that he's quite a great teacher. But he did come through your yard, and he made some comments that I remember you talked about for a while.
Yeah, I think he had some really valuable comments about. One interesting thing, and this is something that I've got to pull out and probably pull out for another podcast, thinking out loud, is, he said, you seem to be trying to fight two fronts. You're trying to refine trees, but you're also trying to grow trees. And this is something that I really feel, that deeply of, like, I see there not being enough marketable material out in the world. And so I'm trying to do my best to create material. But also, like, my training under my apprenticeship was to refine trees and to kind of like that final mile. And so kind of like really trying to balance those two out. But he noticed that pretty quickly. Another thing he noticed was, like, and this is something that I've really explored deeply in the last year. He came almost a year ago, of, the amount of movement trees are getting, and that it has to be a lot, as the trees are so small, the movement has to be much more exaggerated. And so I was giving it nice fine movement, but then the tree was growing out of that fine movement. And so exaggerating the movement, that was a huge thing that I really picked up from that visit, was that the movement was nice, but it wasn't exaggerated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you're talking about a particular scale. So once you move through a different scale, the movement in the young plant changes as well, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So and some of the movement can be edited as we make big cuts, or as we air layer, or as we turn the tree in the pot to become a semi cascade or whatever. That movement can be edited, but really it's those initial couple of years setting up the tree to be the thing, and so trying to think forward 10 or 15 years to what this tree is going to become. That's a really right. Yeah, if you have like a 4-inch tree and you put a series of really tight bends and curves into it, and then put it in a large pot or into the ground, and turn it into a larger plant, that could end up just being a ball of wood. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, and I've begun to see that, and luckily, for the most part, you can, if you catch that early enough, you can just keep it a really small tree. But even a tree in a bonsai pot is going to slowly thicken, and so, if it's right at the edge of becoming a ball of wood, it eventually will. It's going to eventually get there. It might be 20 years, but it'll eventually get there.
Right. There's some plants that seem to grow so slowly. Like juniper is one of them. There's a few of them that'll bulk up in a pot. Some others hardly seem to put on any wood at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have things like trident maples and things like that, where you can really bulk them up in a pot. I think it was Colin Lewis who said that the slower we grow a tree, the higher the quality. I think he wrote that somewhere, and I always had that in the back of my mind. But your comment about hobbyists having a different kind of time,
mm-hmm.
a different assumption about time helps them create a different kind of tree.
Right. And not having the pressure of, a hobbyist, especially someone that's serious and someone that loves to grow, may not even be looking to create a product for most of their lifetime. Especially older people, they're just looking to set something up for the next generation. So they don't necessarily have they're not playing by the same rules as the professional community does, because we have to figure out how to, make money, or we have to figure out how to, do teaching or training. And so it's a little bit of a different game. And so, yeah, it's really sets them up to, in some ways, be able to win, because they can take the time they need to make, cuts sooner.
Right. Right. One of the things I notice in gardens of hobbyists, backyard growers, is that they have a maturation of patina in the trunk to branch transitions, which is kind of hard to get when you grow fast. When you're building structure quickly, you can mature it later. You can make patina with it, but it tends to have to be in a bonsai pot when you're doing that.
Right, especially the fine ramified twiggy growth. Yeah, until you really can slow things down, you can't even.
Yeah, and slowing things down is a real hard thing with certain species. Like I assumed that growing Japanese maples would be best in somewhat larger pots, when I first started growing them. So made all these cuttings and air layers and whatnot, and for years I grew them in Anderson flats, and it was sort of like a little too late that I realized that I was growing these really chunky plants, and I wanted elegant plants. It's Anderson flat, which is, I don't know, maybe several gallons of soil, I think is too much for a lot of the kind of gentle tapers and things that some of the best Japanese maples, I believe, were grown in bonsai pots. They weren't grown in flats or in the ground.
Yeah, really having that smaller amount of soil, the slower, the Anderson flats are perforated on the bottom, so a lot of times if you set them on the ground, the roots escape into the soil or into the bark chip, or even into your rock, and really can... Right. The tree doesn't take long to accelerate. I see this in the ground, where the first year when we put it in the ground, it grows about the same pace as the tree in the pot. But the second year, it's like, whoa. This is not a linear growth. It's definitely a curve happening.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like that rubber band is pulling and pulling. There it goes. It's building a root system.
Yeah, I've put it out on social media, but I really like, at Tilperion they had above ground grow beds, and they were 2x6 material, I think, full of pumice. Of course, we have pumice just falling out of our ears here in Pacific Northwest, but some kind of material that the roots can escape into, but it's not quite the soil. And then, nesting pots on or down into that to let them escape a little bit into that material really helps with, nutrient but so it's kind of a medium between just putting it in the ground and letting it rip versus, having it in a pot. So it's a nice kind of middle ground, especially for the early development stuff. I completely agree with you. When we get a little bit older, we've got to slow it down even further than an Anderson.
But that grow bed that's a neat trick because, as you said, it's kind of halfway, and the second year is when plants can get away from us, which is sooner than almost, including myself. I didn't think things would get away from me that fast when I first started growing plants. When I got back from Japan, I was growing some stock, but what you have in that grow bed is pumice, and so and it's so loose that you can lift the plant up and trim the roots, put it back down, and you have the benefit of that first year without the problem of the second year.
Exactly. Yeah, so some people use baskets or Andersons or bags. But I think the idea is to pull that up once a year, sever the roots, set it right back down. It's not a whole lot of work to make that happen. But it really kind of resets the root system back to the first year. And you kind of get the benefit of the first year over and over.
So you're not creating the problems that are hard to uncreate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a big part of the work that I'm trying to do, and to some extent the work you're trying to do, is how do we skate that razor edge of, we want the most development goal, we want the tree to be healthy, but we don't want 9-inch needles on a ponderosa pine, or we don't want extensions, we don't want internodes on a trident maple that are so big that they have to eventually come back off.
Right. Yeah, the idea of a sacrifice branch ends up being something where we sacrifice more than the branch.
Yeah. Right.
It can easily become that.
It definitely, absolutely. Yeah, the tree shades itself out, it becomes lost.
Right, exactly. You lose the inside.
Yeah,
all that you fought for, you lose. So, going back to the twiggy deciduous plant, my teacher, Suzuki, told me a story once about Hamano, who was his teacher. And Hamano was pointing at this tree. It was this developed tree. It was very twiggy. And he said, so if I cut deep on the inside and make a strong cut on this tree, an old deciduous tree, I've just made it 40 years younger. That is an interesting way to think about it. Think about your pruning tool and where you prune in terms of actual time. How long is it going to take you to grow this thing back
to get back out
where
there?
It was?
Right? Yeah, exactly.
But in early development, all we do is cut hard, and it's in the service of creating good structure. If we don't cut hard, then often we're going to fail. We're not going to make that.
Straight trunks, straight branches. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think that keeping the cart behind the horse it's a good thing.
Sure.
It's tricky to do both, but it can work. So let me try to describe this. If you're in a bonsai pot, you have a tree that doesn't have everything that you want. Maybe you want a thicker trunk on it, but you also don't want to lose any ramification that it might already have, for instance. So you're trying to change a tree that has some qualities you like, such as the refinement, but you also want to do something else to it, so you grow a leader off the top or something like that. So then you're skating that knife edge that we're talking about. I'm trying to do both at the same time. A little bit tricky.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Daisaku-san said that one thing he mentioned when I was in the yard was that Americans like to grow, like on a trident. They like to grow the branch to be thick and then cut it really hard back and then develop the ramification. He said in Japan you often see the ramification happen and then the extension of the ends of all of the branchlets grow out those long to fatten the branch itself. And he said it's funny to see the difference in how Americans think about this and how Japanese think about it. And obviously the Japanese have had a lot longer to work through the details.
Great example. Yeah.
But
I've used that technique, and I prefer it. The second one, the way the Japanese are doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think is a better one. You do two things at the same time.
Yeah, and the issue is that if you do it the way we typically do it, then species that don't backbud, you have to graft, or you have to figure out how to get inner branching to happen. You have to rebuild that inner branching rather than kind of building that naturally. Now, the biggest downside is that it's a lot slower. It's a lot slower to bifurcate early and soon. And
True. But I think the transitions are better.
Oh, yeah.
From the thicker part of the branch to the thinner part of the branch, it's more natural when you grow that extension off the tip while you're creating your ramification on the inside.
Right.
Cut back to a branch that you've already developed something. There's something different there.
Yeah.
I think it's because when we cut back a strong branch hard without anything being back there, the branch panics. This is one way to think about it. And it throws out something with a long internode.
Right,
but if you've created your twigging on the inside, it already has these short little internodes. And it already has a pathway. So that might be why the Japanese prefer it. But at least the aesthetics are in the camp of what they're doing. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the win.
Yeah, and this is something I learned in your yard is that, if we have a dozen growth points on a branch, then the energy is split between them. So if we had one big branch and we have a 12x amount of energy going through that, when we make a big cut, then that's when it's going to send out a bunch of little branches with really long internodes because it's got so much energy.
Right.
And so one way to slow that branch down is to increase the points of light that it's having to spread out over. To really create that ramification instead of, getting these long internodes, bunch of branching happening.
Right. And once you have that inner twigging, then you make your big cut because then it's going to be slowed down a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, to talk about bonsai grown very slowly, maybe in a backyard with that infinite amount of time that hobbyists have is so wonderful. Grown from a seedling or a cutting. I have a few trees now in my yard, the 3 or 4 that I know were grown from 2-3-year-old seedlings and cuttings. A couple of them were grown almost 70 years ago from cutting. From this country, they're not imported. And there's literally no chance of replicating that. What those plants have, fast.
Right.
You can only replicate it if you start a seedling or cutting, or you get this from somewhere else. Maybe as a somewhat younger plant, but something that has that almost a break. I would think. A bonsai pot So just to talk about speed of growth, the fastest is in the ground.
Right.
The next fastest is a large pot on the ground. Maybe the next slowest, I should say, is that large pot on a bench, and then the slowest is going to be a small pot on a bench.
And even faster than in the ground is unconstrained in the ground, because some people I know just put a plant in the ground, in the soil, and let it go, and then constraining it in the bag on the ground.
Right. There's another one.
Yeah, and then your pot.
How much does that slow it down?
I don't think it does a whole lot of. I think they're probably pretty similar for 3 or 4 years, but then the bag in the ground hits a wall because the available soil to the root system is gone.
Yeah.
And so, you probably do. If you looked at them 3 years on, you probably couldn't tell, but at 5 years, you probably start seeing the one in the ground that sent out big roots, really going hard.
Got it.
And so, if you're cutting them out. If you're cutting them out every 3 years anyway, maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The removal is definitely easier. I often can just pull them up by hand if it's in a bag.
Wow.
As opposed to,
Wow.
I think...
So what's a percentage that'll have an escape root? A big one?
A big escape root in 3 years, nothing will.
Nothing?
Yeah.
So regardless of species?
Yeah. I have seen trident maples find holes in a sewn seam of a bag.
Right.
I have seen Scots pines do that. But otherwise, everything is, every root that escapes is the thickness of a pencil line or maybe twice that size. So it's really not much.
So it's going to take a few years for that to...
But, you fast forward to trees we dug at Telperion post-fire, and, there were leg-sized Scots pine roots that had escaped out the corner, and
wow,
or trident maples also moved that much, but generally, I don't see movement going through a bag very much.
Interesting.
So you would almost believe that no good can come from that. But I look at 2 trees that one's on the ground in a pot next to a ground-grown tree in a bag, and it's twice the size in 2 years. So you have to believe that some sort of nutrient, water, warmth, something is being transferred through that.
So for a backyard hobbyist, what would the percentage of pot grown versus some version of in the ground grown be if they were to be experimental with these techniques?
Yeah, I think in a perfect setting, you would probably have 1/3 in the ground and 2/3 out of the ground, and sort of have things on mostly a 3-year cycle.
Rotating out of the ground into a pot.
Yeah.
Got it.
So maybe you're in the ground for a couple of years and out of the ground a couple of years, and you kind of, 2/3 of the collection are always out of the ground, and then some things are being put back in to accelerate after a year or two. Because I think if you're not in the ground for 2 years, you probably don't get the benefit of being in the ground. So I think at least 2 years or maybe 3-year stints in the ground, and then pull them out, and that really throws the brakes.
Right.
And then it kind of, that first year you throw the brakes, then it kind of recovers from that the second year, and then it can go back in the ground.
And then you begin to then talk about maturation once you get it out of the ground the final time. And
exactly.
You had a point where you feel some people sort of hit a wall at a certain point.
I think, if we talk about the serious grower, weekend warrior type of grower, I think that probably is some point in which most of them, are getting the advice of a professional, or, if we think about a tree, once you get to 75 or 80% of ready for a show, I think that's when a professional can really step in and help make some big decisions. As far as like refinement. I mean, obviously having the hand of someone that understands the whole process in from the beginning to help not have to fix problems, but set trees up to not have problems is, I think, ideal. But then I think at some point the professional community is there to like really pull that tree into like final readiness.
Yeah. Yeah, so some of these techniques that we've been discussing in the ground or in a large pot or on top of a grow bed, they probably save a percentage, right, of time, because bonsai is all about time, and we don't need it to be any slower.
Oh, right.
It is already.
Right, and the third, a third in the ground, a third just come out of the ground, a third ready to go back in the ground. I think, also looking at actual numbers, I think if a hobbyist, can have, that's a fine line of like how many is too many to take care of, but then how many is so little that you're loving them to death. But to figure out what that number is for people of like, we don't want you to be overwhelmed by the work, but what amount of work, especially in the beginning, can you handle? Yeah. Can you handle yourself really to do that attention? And then I think, same as I'm wanting to do, people, I would encourage people to, if you can take care of 100 black pines the first year, by the second year, then you can't take care of 100 anymore. So you have to cut the flock down a little bit. And then by the time you're decandling in 5 years and getting branching set up, or 4 years, then you can't decandle 100 black pines. You have to refine that number, and as the branches get more refined and your fine wiring black pines, you maybe by that time your crop is to 10 or 8.
Yeah.
And so trying to like getting the help to figure out what quality we're looking for, how to cull the crop, how to figure out what's the best thing to push forward, I think is a big that's a big skill set to figure out how to do that. But then initially having enough where you're not just loving things to death, because
that's a big one.
Yeah. I mean, the knife cuts both ways. It's like,
it does.
How many of us started with collections that were way too big to handle? How many people?
Everybody's hands go up.
Yeah, exactly. How many hobbyists started with way too many trees? But then you meet in the middle somewhere there. Like, I was just listening to a Bonsai Q video. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
He goes around and meets with a number of professionals. But I was just listening or watching one last night on YouTube, and he mentioned that he buys all of his trees from hobbyists. All of his stock, and he's probably buying, just looking at them, probably 5-year-old or 8-year-old junipers and pines, white pines, black pines. And there are specialty white pine growers, especially that are commercial growers, but for the most part he mentioned that as a commercial nursery he relies heavily on backyard hobbyists. And
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, right?
Wow. Well, I actually hope most of what we've said here will give people courage about what they're doing in their backyards.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and one thing I mentioned in the conversation I had with Daisaku-san was he mentioned that he develops people, like he helps people develop their growing skills. Wow. That's one of the big things that he does is he has quarterly, seasonal, or monthly seasonal get-togethers with a core group of people. And they have their own collections, but then they also take parts of his collection home. So he teaches them how to carve dead wood, and then he sends them home with 5 of his junipers. And so there's a little bit of like back and forth between, this core group of a dozen people that he really works to develop. They're using his expertise, they're using his, I can water on the weekends, the weekdays, the mornings, the evenings. I can keep things frost protected, different than someone that has a 9-to-5 job. But the skill that he's using is he's training people to use the skills that he teaches to try to further along the trees that he doesn't have the time and energy to work on.
Yeah. Wow. Kind of adjunct gardens to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So in addition to the refining. Teaching part of it, he's really doing, from the beginning. Yeah,
I have a couple clients who have beautiful old trees and yet love working on really young stock, and I think the work they do is spectacular. They're really attentive, take their time. They take the inside the ground, outside the ground, all that stuff really seriously. They do all their own carving. It's just gorgeous work.
Yeah, I've seen some of the work, and it's amazing. I'm always blown away by viewing finished work, finished trees, but I constantly am coming back to, like, I just love the young stuff, the development stuff. I think there's a lot of hobbyists that are kind of in that era of, like, they love the finished art piece, but it's the creation that's, the hands-on thing. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for chatting today. This was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of fun.
Thank you.
Music on today's podcast is brought to you by the fine folks at Blue Dot Sessions. Check them out at www.sessions.blue.